Hey friends, it's Joby here with another episode of the AusGamers Weekly Wrap-Up, brought to you by Coca-Cola's Colour Your Summer campaign. I'm joined once again by Stephen Farrelly, Managing Editor at AusGamers. Stephen, who put the bop in the bop shwop?
Oh, not this again. I'll get back to you.
Yeah, we'll see. First things first, in this week's news, Grand Theft Auto 5 has been removed from the shelves of Target Australia, and all Grand Theft Auto products have been removed from shelves in K-Mart in Australia. This is an interesting move. It is based on, well, in Target's case, it's based on the responses to a petition that went online earlier this week. And in K-Mart's case, they are claiming that they have done an extensive review of a significant review of the content in all Grand Theft Auto games, which is surprising considering it's only been a week. But, good turnaround on that. I'm sure it actually happened.
And that clearly had nothing to do with the fact that both companies are actually owned by a holding company by the name of West Farmers.
Yes, no, I'm sure it's not related at all. I'm sure independent situations. This is actually pretty interesting because of the fact that the petition that spiked this movement, it alleges some very interesting things about the Grand Theft Auto games, and I think ultimately, if the case were that the game in the petition existed, everyone would argue for it to be removed from store shelves. The game that they describe, which incentivizes sexualized violence against women and trains little boys to become woman-hating monsters. If that game actually existed, nobody would want it to exist. Nobody would say, "Oh, but it should be sold in Target." No, that doesn't happen. But the actual case is that GTA 5 isn't really like that. That isn't the case for it at all.
No. There is actually no physical way to do any sexual violence within the game. You can go into strip clubs and you can't actually take any weapons in there. You can't swing your fists around in there. So yes, there is some moral grey areas in the game, but it's a game about criminals. It's a game about the underworld. And yes, as you point out, Joe, in no way, shape or form does the game actually allow you to commit any acts of sexual violence against women.
No, and I think it's a little bit insulting, and it flies in the face. It's regressive logic to claim that Grand Theft Auto 5 is this game that impacts boys in this way, because it implies that games are still a media specifically for young children. Boys implies young males, and boys also implies that it's still just the purview of males in general.
And let's not forget then that they're talking about little boys, and we've seen through social media this week that Target has actually been advertising this game in their pamphlets in the kids section. So if Target and the people who created this petition are worried about little boys being shaped and altered by the game, perhaps they should be looking at the rating that it actually got, which is R18, and making sure that little boys can't play it.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the rating, because the fact of the matter is, the fact that it got an R18 plus rating indicates that the game can't involve sexualized violence. It's not something that's allowed. If it were to be allowed classification in Australia, the moment a game involves either incentivizing drug use that relates to incentives or rewards, or incentivizing sexual violence, the moment either of those things happen, a game still becomes refused classification, or is refused classification, depending on how you want to phrase that. And so the fact that it got an R18 plus rating indicates flat out that the game described in the petition isn't Grand Theft Auto 5.
And the problem with this as well is that basically it creates a falsehood about the game that the average consumer will actually eat up. I know a lot of the mainstream press has picked up on this week, and they're misinforming people as well, because they themselves aren't informed about it. And so it's problematic for the game and for the game's reputation, but it's also problematic for the general consumer, because they're not being told the truth, and it's snowballing into this really silly argument. Don't get us wrong, Target and K-Mart are both well within their rights to pull the game, and it might not actually suit the demographic of people that shop at those stores. So I don't really see an issue with them pulling it, but I see an issue with the reasoning behind it.
You know, and I completely understand why people would be upset. People are very upset. They're upset on both sides of the issue. And I understand why the people who back the petition are upset, because from their point of view, that game is abhorrent. But it's not the game that exists in the real world. And so I understand why gamers are rejecting the concept, because Australian gamers spent a long time getting an R18 plus rating in this country, and Target ignoring that rating and deciding to remove the game from shelves, it indicates a lack of faith in a system that we were forced to adhere to for a long time. And, you know, why wouldn't you be upset if, for the longest time, if you wanted to play games designed for adults in Australia, you were forced to go through not illegal, but grey importing situations just to get games like Mortal Kombat?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, and I can absolutely understand why someone would be upset about that.
The average age of the modern gamer in Australia is 32.
Yes, exactly. It's 32, and 54% are females. So we're not talking about little boys playing these games anymore. It's time to move on. It's time to accept that games are growing up. And, you know, speaking of growing up, maybe Grand Theft Auto 5 could do a little growing up. It is controversial for a reason. It's definitely got some sexist tendencies within it, but ultimately, it's not a game about causing violence to women.
Yes.
That's not the case. So
these systems that we have in place in Australia are designed for you to make the right decisions at the end of the day. And when you're overlooking that, when you're not making those right decisions, when you're not using these tools that we've created, then you're failing the system.
Exactly. Anyway, on to other news. Let's move on to another murder simulator. DayZ is releasing in 2016, but as of this week, it's got vehicles within it. You can now get into a vehicle in the stable release and drive around, which is a very interesting development for the game, because for the longest time you've had to walk everywhere, turning into a Lord of the Rings simulator as well.
Yeah, and these things aren't just transportation vehicles; they're now points of skirmish, because nobody wants to walk, so everybody wants a vehicle. So anytime anyone sees one of these vehicles, it's going to become a contended point of conflict.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, we've now got another reason for people to interact with one another. And while most people interact in DayZ through hostile means, it could turn into even more interesting social interactions, which is ultimately what DayZ is all about. Do you think you're about going to jump into DayZ now that you don't have to walk everywhere?
Yeah, I think it might be time.
Yeah.
Let's just chalk this one up similar to the Soul series, and I think every week we're going to find that there's some game I need to jump into. But thankfully, I know that you're a bit of an expert at DayZ, so I have a guide.
I'll take you through the world of Chernarus and try and stop you from getting lost.
And it was also announced that the game is going to be heading to console.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so it will be heading to consoles after it finally releases in 2016, which I think is a very interesting situation for Bohemia Interactive, because ultimately the Armour engine that DayZ sort of runs on is quite complex, and it will be very, very challenging for them to port the control system to an actual controller. So that will be very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might be the preferred way for a lot of people to play, though. As long as they can get the player limits right.
Yeah, and communication as well needs to be looked at and worked on. So hopefully, maybe they just do something similar to on the console that they did with the PC release and soft launch with an alpha, and just kind of really learn how the console community plays, because it is fundamentally different to PC. So
true.
No, I didn't take everything. I took your can opener and I replaced it with a screwdriver. It's not as effective a can opener, that's all.
I just found that can opener here.
Sorry, dude. They're so valuable. They're the best thing in the game.
I found a couple in this house that's just around.
Joby, good guy, Greg.
If you ever see them, grab all of them. You can have your backpack. Be careful. See you, buddy.
Can I come with you?
No, I just robbed you. I'd feel bad about that.
Anyway, on to other news, and Hearthstone Goblins and Gnomes is releasing on December 9, but if you want to get in and play with those cards today, you can, simply by jumping into the arena. And, more than that, Blizzard has made it very easy for you to jump into the arena by giving everyone one free pass access to the random card mode that is a major part of Hearthstone.
Yeah, this is... if you haven't been following, this is basically going to change the game. I can't wait for this card deck, these card packs to hit. 120 new cards. The entire meta is going to change. I think it's going to really shake up a lot of the professional players. It's hopefully going to bring new players back, old players back, new players in, and it's really colourful and awesome. We spoke about it the other day. Are you going to?
Oh, I'll definitely be playing. You know, I'm definitely keen to see if I can make another world-beating free card deck that I can use to destroy you and all of your family members until the rest of the time. Yeah, it's just, you know, I'm just sort of a warlock master.
Right.
You know.
He thinks he's kind of a big deal.
I am kind of a big deal.
But I will just continue to use my aggro hunter on you and...
That's true.
Yeah. And Blizzard has also added a cool new feature, a spectator mode, baked into the game now.
Yeah, so you can now jump in and watch your friends play simply by bringing up the friends list, clicking on the little eye while they're playing in a game, and yeah, you'll see what choices they're making, what cards they're playing, and yeah, you can also snoop on what cards they have in their hand,
yeah.
So you might be able to gain some advantage against them next time.
I just love it because it means I can rewatch myself beating you over and over again.
Oh my god, ridiculous. Yeah, nobody really needs to see, you know, your dreams. It doesn't actually dive into, you know, the other world so that it can watch while you're asleep. That's a bit beyond the game. Anyway.
Goblins and Gnomes is out next week on December 9.
It is. Speaking of, no, not speaking of anything. One of the things we have been speaking of for the last 2 weeks is a very monstrous game that we haven't been allowed to talk about, but we are now finally cleared to talk about it.
Yes. Evolve. Joab and I had the good fortune to go out to Turtle Rock Studios out in California. They're not too far from the Blizzard boys, so it is sort of speaking of.
Oh,
there you go.
Of course.
But yeah, we saw everything except the final monster, basically. So every map, all the new modes, we played through the new modes, the 4 new hunters that were actually the original hunters that these guys created. But yeah, the game modes are really cool.
Yeah, they're real, like super diverse. For a long time, I thought the only game mode that they had in play was hunt mode, but now we get to see all 4 of the new ones include and hunt on top of it. So there are 5 modes. The first one, rescue, is fantastic. It's a real challenging map, really reinforces that asymmetrical gameplay as a bunch of civilian survivors are littered across the map, and the hunters need to get to them first to evacuate them, to send them to rescue pods, and get them off planet.
So it's also like a little bit of a fetch mission because they have to follow you to the extraction point. So not only do you find them, you then need to lead them. Now they're capable of fighting on their own, but they're not very powerful. And obviously the other side of this coin is that the monster jumps in, and as soon as the hunters find any of the survivors, the monster immediately knows where they are. Or if you're a really good monster, you can go and find them before the hunters do and just eat them.
Yeah, and so that introduces a very interesting dynamic for the monster because the civilians are equipped with weapons, they provide an extra amount of firepower that the monster needs to deal with. And so because the monster's already at a disadvantage at stage 1, there could be some incentive for the monster to go attempt to eat and stage up while the hunters are evacuating civilians en masse, only to then come back and attempt to, you know, destroy them when it's stage 3. There's a lot of strategizing involved because it flips then, because, you know, the hunters don't need 4 hunters to save a couple of civilians.
You can split your group up completely.
You can go harass the monster, things like that. And there's a cascading effect where you attempt to work out what the other team is doing and manage your next move around that, which is really cool. And then there's nest mode, where suddenly the monster is on the defensive. It's attempting to save 6 eggs littered around the map. from the hunters.
There are more eggs, but you only need to do 6 for the win.
Is that? I don't. Okay. That's okay. Fair enough.
No, because that brings me to the other point. Because the monster can actually hatch one of those eggs.
Right.
And you can have a beta monster running around with you, and when he dies, you can just go and hatch another one. You can always have a little monster with you, which is really cool.
Yeah, and that's it does it introduces some really interesting thoughts about the makeup of the monsters genetically, because suddenly you've got smaller beta monsters. They're always small Goliaths. While you've also got the alpha monster. The player monster is an alpha monster, and only alphas are able to stage up, or able to evolve. So it sort of introduces some thought exercises about the nature of the monster themselves, which is really cool. And of course, it's a very cool game mode, because once those 6 eggs are destroyed, 6 eggs or beta monsters are destroyed, that's it. It's game over for the monster. So it becomes a race against time, which is really cool. And speaking of races against time, defend mode is absolutely a race against time. You've got 6 minutes as the monster to destroy 3 levels of defenses in the hunter's world, and once you do that, you win. But there's more to it than just that, though.
Yeah, so you get dumped into the game world as the monster already at stage 3, and then you just have hordes of beta Goliaths just running at these generators, kind of like creeps in a MOBA, and so your actual objective isn't really to go and attack those generators. You really need to let your little guys do that. Your job is to actually stop the hunters from stopping the beta monsters. The offset to that, though, is that in this mode, the hunters respawn every 30 seconds after they've been killed. So, yeah, it's not attrition. It's like very aggressive mode, and it changes the game, because the maps themselves are also really unique to defend. So you can play most of the other modes on any of the other maps, but defend has its own maps, and there's almost no verticality to these maps as well. So it's actually quite hard to get to hide, or to get above ground and take out the hunters that way. So it really brings the battle to the ground.
Yeah, it does, and it really puts the onus on the monster to force the hunters into patterns that they might not want to adhere to. It really forces the monster to dictate the flow of the game. Otherwise, if the hunters take control, they will definitely win. And so, it's a different sort of game to the other modes for the monster, which is really cool.
But then the really cool thing that culminates all of this, and there's a reason that there are 5 modes, and that is that Turok has introduced a mode called Evacuation, which actually takes place across 5 in-game days. So each each round is 1 day. But what happens is there are scenarios within each map and each mode that whether the monster wins or the humans win changes the next map. There's a variable that comes into play, and these can be really, really large variables, or they can be really small. But there's somewhere in the vicinity of 800,000 possible variations
of maps, modes, and the winning conditions.
Yeah.
They change everything about the game, and it's really interesting to see them in action, because suddenly, if you know what goal you've got for that mission, it can become very important. There's one map where suddenly, if you lose as the hunters, the next map will see a second alpha monster unleashed upon the map. And as a hunter, when you enter that map, winning is your only goal. You have to win at all costs, because trying to take on 2 alpha monsters at once, both of them able to level up, both of them able to stage up and become super monsters, is unbelievably complex.
And then you want to be careful that people don't vote for Nest as the next mode, because then you can have another beta monster running around, and it just dynamically alters the way that you think about it. So yeah, every time you play this evacuation mode, it's going to be different and unique, and I think it's going to be really hard for people to kind of work out winnable strategies that they can apply every single time, which is probably the best thing about it. And it kind of falls back to that asymmetrical design philosophy that the studio has come up with, and the 5th day is actually the defend mode, so that's always defend on the 5th day, but they've also introduced some really cool things, like if you're the hunters and you win 4 games in a row, when you get into that fifth round, there's actually a handicap, 4 blocks of handicap against you. So they're working really hard on balancing and making sure that people...
Keeping it interesting for both teams.
Yeah.
Because, there is definitely a chance that if you got to day 4 as a monster and you lost the first 3 days, you might not be inclined to go and play again. You don't really want to sit there getting pummeled every day. And so the auto balancing situation sort of gives both teams a chance to win while still allowing the better team to press their advantage.
Yeah.
Although we did notice that on the final day, if you do win 4 games in a row, the final day, it can be very tough. The advantage that the other team, the losing team, has could be perhaps insurmountable at this point.
Yeah.
Although it's still in progress. So.
It's still in progress, but boy does it look good. Plays wonderfully. This is a game changer in my opinion as far as multiplayer and co-op games go. And February can't come soon enough.
No, absolutely.
We should know more about the new monster very soon as well. And just in case you hadn't heard, Turtle Rock are making sure that even though there is going to be DLC, all the maps are going to be free, and no one's going to be gated from playing any part of the game. So even if you didn't buy one of the DLC monsters, it just means that you can't play as him. You can still play against him, though.
Against him on his map, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really cool. I think that wraps up this week's wrap up.
It sure does. Was it Spike?
Spike, as in Cowboy Bebop?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you might. Accuse Spike. I thought you might try to deflect the blame somehow, because we all know it was you who put the bop in the bop shawop, and I have it on good authority that you also put the ram in the ramalama ding dong, and you're going down for it, Steve. I've had enough of this bullshit. Put your hands down. We're getting you some mugs next week. It's ridiculous. I wanted to thank you guys for joining us. I wanted to thank Steve for putting up with me. And we'd like to thank Coca-Cola for sponsoring the show. Head to our front page to enter to win one of 5,000 FIFA Ultimate Team codes. Just click on the link and you can enter there. I guess we'll be back next week.
Yeah, we'll be back next week. Still lots of cool stuff going on, even though the year's rounding out. So, stick around.
Cool. Thank you very much. Bye.